Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 3 of the Stop Renting podcast. I am Rodrigo.
Kara Berger.
Today's episode is interview your realtor,
Yes, interview your agent.
your agent.
Yes.
So,
Why should you interview your agent? What does that mean? What do you look for?
correct. So, this is, I guess, a little bit for like buy and sell side, whether you're selling your house or you're buying your house. I think it's extremely important for people to actually have good conversations, good interviews. I use the word interview very specifically with whoever you're going to have help you buy or sell your house. So previous episode, we talked about why you do need a realtor. So step 1, you do need a realtor more than likely.
Yeah.
Step 2, interview that realtor. So,
one, I feel like you need to first see if you guys mesh well.
Correct.
Not just saying they're a bad agent or, you're a bad client or whatever.
Yeah.
It's just like if your personalities kind of mesh.
No, yeah.
Because I feel like that makes a big difference.
It does, because there's going to be more than likely, let's say there's like a 60 to 70% chance there's going to be some hard conversations. And if you gel, vibe, click, whatever your adjective,
you got to vibe right.
Yeah, if you get along with the agent, first of all, the whole thing's gonna be a lot smoother. You and whoever else you're buying with or by yourself, you're gonna be more excited to go and see the houses. You're gonna get along better. You're gonna have a better feel for the individual properties because you like who you're not like annoyed by the person next to you.
Yeah, so that's important.
Yeah, and then if stuff goes wrong, which we've talked about in real estate, stuff does go wrong. You want somebody that you have a similar communication style with, so that they can explain things to you and you can understand it, and the chances that it gets resolved, whatever it is, are exponentially increased because you get along with that person.
Like you work well together. That's the
Correct.
whole point.
Yeah.
So you want to work well with the person,
Exactly.
with your agent. So you want to, interview them, see how they are, just how the conversation goes. You can kind of tell off the bat. Like,
correct.
If you're gonna work well with someone. So I think that's very important because that will make the transaction so much more smoother.
100%. And I think a lot of people, I would just be like, oh, they're my mom's realtor, they're my dad's realtor, my friend's realtor, and it's like, that's awesome. And that's great. They probably did have a great transaction with your whoever recommended them to you. That doesn't mean that you're not allowed to have like a really just frank go get coffee. Like, don't even talk about real estate, like go talk about anything else. See if you actually get like, this is somebody who you want to spend a significant amount of time with, depending on where you are in your home buying process. But just talk to them, ask questions, make sure at the highest level that you can at least stand to like be near this person. You I don't know, you vibe, you click, you gel with. I think
that's my word.
Yeah. I've seen it a lot. Again, this is from experience. We're having this conversation is that I've seen people, it's like, for whatever reason, there's just a disconnect and it's awkward, especially from when I've been a listing agent. Sometimes it's like, I see that and it's like, even when they're like walking around the house, it's like, you guys don't even get along. Like, why?
Yeah.
So it's just
true. I feel like people sometimes just jump in, like the first person they talk to, okay, you're my agent.
Correct.
Which is fine. Like, that happens a lot. I see that happen all the time. I'll talk to someone and then, but they didn't really get to know me, but that's okay. But I think that's why you should get to know, your agent.
Yeah. And I think it does help solve a lot of the headaches further down the line. I think that's one of the main things I want to
interview. So what are like things you need to find out? What is
so the
checklist of like my agent?
So the first one is vibe, chill, click, whatever. The second one, I think that's extreme. I think that's just as important as the second part, which we're going to talk about, is like the quality of the agent. And I think this is like a very don't talk about this. People, I don't know, some people might get offended.
Yeah, right.
Don't really care. Like, the reality of the situation is like, whether you're a pilot or a lawyer or an engineer, or I'm not saying we're that important, but there's repercussions to when we do our job wrong and when we make mistakes. That's just the honest truth. And it's usually money. And sometimes, depending on the value of the house, it's a lot of money. So I think it's fair to hold realtors to some degree to some type of standard. And you can only hold somebody to a standard if you ask them questions, if you interview them.
Yeah.
So my first one, and is again a little taboo, but it's like, what experience do you have in real estate? Did you start, is this your first home? Is this your 10th home? One question that I think is completely fair to ask is, how many homes have you sold in the last year or two?
Yeah, that is
I think that's a completely valid question. I think that does two things. If the person is brand new, that's perfectly fine. And again, we were all
you can
agents.
And find out if they are brand new, like, what do they know? Like, you're not saying that's a bad
it's not
thing,
a bad thing,
or just knowing, getting to know your agent and what how can they provide to you? Like, what can they, help you with this transaction?
Yeah. Even if you're a new agent, so we talked in another episode about like teams. If you're a new agent and you're on a team and you have either other agents, experienced agents, or a team leader to go to, I would venture to guess, or I would bet that new agent can probably handle more situations because they have that backup of the team
100%.
Than a lot of experienced agents. So I'm not even saying ask them how many they sold. It might be their first house. It really might. And if they can answer, if they say, hey, I've sold, this is my first transaction, you're my first client, but if something goes wrong, I have this, and this experience to come from. I have these people that I can call. I have my broker, my team lead, whatever. So not to say that it's not it's a negative. It's just, but you want to know that answer. I think it's fair.
Who's standing behind them? If something were to,
to go wrong,
something to go wrong,
which happens. Yeah.
And, and they could also, just interview and try to kind of find out their experience and, how would they handle a situation. At the end of the day, that's really what matters most. How would they handle something or this, that, what's their work, ethic I guess.
Yeah, 100%. And we're going to talk about work ethic. When we get to, this is on buyer's agent. When we get to seller side, we're going to talk about work ethic and the phone calls. So the second, was it? Oh, so your experience. So the next one that I would ask them, it's if you don't know something, what do you do? And I think that just hey, if we run into the situation where we're in an inspection period and I don't know, the trust is broken and there was some crazy thing. Who do you go to? What's your response system? I think that's also a very valid question because you find out what backup systems do they have. Maybe they say, I've been doing this for 30 years. I know exactly what's going to happen in every situation. That's my experience. If that's good with you, but you at least at that point, from the buyer perspective, when something bad happens, what your buyer's agent's response is going to be. Are they going to go find experience from somebody else? Do they already have a good amount of experience themselves? You at least know that answer. What other questions?
What other questions for your agent? So if you vibe, your experience,
what happens when something goes wrong?
What happens when something goes wrong? And again, then we talked about being on the team versus not team. Totally fine to be a single agent. Totally great to be on a team. Being on a team is just beneficial because you have other people that can assist as well.
It's a support system.
Support system. But not saying if you're a single agent, you don't have a support system.
Correct.
You absolutely do. You have other people you can reach out to. But I think those are the main things. And just, seeing again, how much handholding do you need as a client?
Correct.
Are you someone that, wants to know everything 24/7, which is fine? Are you someone that's just wants their agent to just handle everything for you type thing? Because I think that kind of helps you understand, how busy is the agent you're reaching out to? Do they have time for you? Not saying everyone has time, but again, agents are very, very busy. So
there's 24 hours in the day.
Are you able to call them and they can show up right in that moment for you? I think that's a good, another good question, another good thing to kind of figure out. Because if you needed something to be answered or them to show up at a property ASAP because you're in town for only 3 hours,
or it's a multi-bid situation.
And if they can't, are they going to be able to quickly provide that another agent or someone else to come show you? So I think that also kind of.
I think one thing that I want to touch on, you said it perfectly, was what type of buyer are you? So and this is going to help you out better because there's plenty of different types of personalities out there, which means there's plenty of different types of buyers.
Yep.
And I would think you would want your agent to know what type of buyer you are. So they either they're used to that type of buyer and they're good with it, or maybe it doesn't gel with them, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I think
that happens. And that's not a bad thing. Are they a good fit? Are you, do you need, again, a lot of hand holding or you have a million questions or this is your first time? So you're very nervous, totally, that is totally A-okay. But that would also help us decide if we're a good match, because then you could always just refer, hey, I don't know if I'm going to be the best for you, but let me refer you to Rodrigo and he's the perfect, he will, handle everything and be a great match with you for the whole thing.
Yeah. One thing that I think it's an interesting one, but me and my wife speak Spanish. I've seen it a bunch of times where this is just one specific characteristic of speaking Spanish, and some buyers prefer to speak Spanish. I've seen a bunch of agents that do not speak Spanish and will for lack of referring it out, will just be I'm going to work with this client. And it's, again, I speak both languages and I've done transactions in both languages. If the buyer doesn't speak English to a certain level, it makes it very dangerous. I would say dangerous. Difficult and dangerous because things can get lost very easily in a Google translator. So it's just one thing where it's like this to me, when I see that, I'm like, there wasn't enough like back and forth at the beginning. They're just, for whatever reason, this buyer chose this realtor. And I can almost see, because I've experienced it. I've seen like, these are the problems that are very likely to come up. And again, we've talked about it before. It's like a problem in real estate might just be like, oh, some people got upset, or it could be thousands of dollars.
Yeah, like a serious problem
that are gone.
So that was just, because miscommunication.
Because of miscommunication, yeah. So I think that's just, again, that's one example that I bring up from my personal experience. But I think a lot of it is just interview your agent, like take the time to have a 10, 15, 20 minute on the phone or coffee or whatever conversation, and make sure that you both understand each other. You both understand where you're trying to get to. And it's not,
I think it's important.
Yeah. I think a lot of
people, that will just help your transaction,
the whole process. It'll just make it easier.
Your journey, your like home, buying journey, whether investment, second home, first time buyer, whatever you are. I think that'll just help, kind of set the tone of what it's going to be like.
No, and I think we said it at the first stage is like, if you gel with the person, like I have clients that still come out on my boat. Like, there's people that we help buy a house, and me and my wife got along with them great. They're very similar to us. They have kids around the same age as our kids. Like, it was a beautiful transaction. And we remain friends with them, and like,
we love that.
Like, yeah, we do. It's not always going to be like that, but,
and not all agents are like that. But most, like we love people. We're people pleasers.
You have to like people to do this job.
We like people, so we're here to make friends and help you out as much as we can.
Yeah.
So I think interviewing your agent and seeing if you guys could be friends and you guys could mesh well, that's important.
It really is, and I think it just makes, and it's not just to make it like funner, but it does actually have an implication on the transaction. I want that to be very clear, that if something comes up, you want somebody that you have somewhat of a good rapport with, because if your agent is scared or worried about how you're going to react, or they don't know how to approach you because you guys have two different communication styles, again, it's more likely that a situation can come up where somebody's either going to get upset, or again, money's going to be lost.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty good from the buyer side.
Yeah, that's the buyer side.
Just make sure they're somewhat experienced. They can have some type of either support system or who to talk to. And that, more importantly, it's like, do you guys get along? Can you stand going to spend 4, 5, 6 hours a day with this person? Yeah.
And you feel comfortable with them.
You feel comfortable
can ask
with
them
anything.
Yeah,
you can ask them anything. You're not shy around them. Yeah.
So that's the buyer.
The buyer side.
So listing
side. When you're selling your house. This one I'm excited for. So same thing. And this already does happen. Obviously, when you go to interview as a listing agent to go buy a house, we call it a listing appointment. You bring your documentation. You basically go and you interview already for selling the house. You go to the buyer's house, the seller's house. You walk the house. You have, each agent does it a little bit differently. You have paperwork with you. You say, my team can do this, this, and this to market the house. You'll probably have a discussion around commission, which we'll talk about in another episode. But I think sometimes what happens is people are, I wouldn't say caught up in the marketing, but I will say caught up in the marketing.
Yeah.
So you can do a YouTube video, you can have podcasts, you can have content on social media, you can have websites, you can have perfect pictures, you can have anything you can think of, like,
it's attractive.
It's attractive. It's beautiful.
Yes,
there's postcards. It can be. So one thing I like to say is we do traditional, digital, and social media marketing. So that's literally all 3 levels of marketing. We do it when we go sell a house. We do all of that. A lot of other companies do it. I think we do a good job of it. But that's up to the market to decide.
Right.
But what I think happens, we do a great job.
We do.
Well, one of the things I think that happens is that people get so caught up in the marketing, like, oh my God, look at their social media, look at this, and they don't take the time to interview the individual who's sitting across from them. And I think that's what it causes some issues.
It does.
And it may cause issues between the seller and the listing agent, especially if the property takes a while to sell, depending on the market and pricing and all that. But I think where causes the most damage, and the sellers aren't always aware of this, which is why I'm glad we're doing this, is how that listing agent is perceived by the buyer's agents in the market. So we've already talked about why you should probably have a buyer's agent. And if you don't have a buyer's agent, this would be even more difficult. So what I like to call is like the cold call test. So please, if you are selling your home or thinking of selling your home, don't use your phone. Grab somebody else's phone and call your prospective listing agent. Or if you have a house you're selling, call your listing agent and see how long it takes for them to answer the phone, or if they call you back. I think that's from my years on the buying side. I think that's one of the biggest frustrations that I've ever had in real estate is that listing agents are just not able to.
Never available.
Never available, which honestly, if you have a client who has, this is just a real life example. If you have a client who has a question about the house,
right,
and
it happens all the time.
It happens all the time. And it's just, there's a lot of information publicly displayed, and we can look up tax records, insurance questions.
We try to get everything we can.
Permits, yeah.
And then sometimes there's even more that we're like, wait, we have to talk to the listing agent. Like, there's no other way around it.
Yeah.
And you reach out, but
and they don't answer.
And hear back for a bit.
For a bit. So,
and you're like, okay.
Okay. So I think that's one question that people don't, again, get lost. And nobody's fault. We do great market. I'm sure our listing presentation is awesome. Yeah. I know it is. So I know people probably get lost and don't ask us these questions, but I think that's one question that people should ask their listing agents a lot is how available are you?
Yeah.
If a buyer's agent or maybe just a buyer who's unrepresented, it's still, when you're on the selling side, it doesn't really matter to you that much, kind of. But like if somebody calls, like how long is your average response time? Are we talking 1 or 2 hours? Are we talking days?
Yeah.
And that's not hyperbolic. There's literally days sometimes.
There's days, yeah. Sometimes they need to follow back up.
Yeah.
But then that hurts the deal because
it hurts the sellers.
At some point they're gonna be like, well, one, they didn't respond, I'm looking at the next property, or no, I don't want to work with them because we didn't hear back from them.
Exactly.
So like, they get like almost, offended.
It is 100%. Yeah.
I think staying on it when you're a listing agent is very important.
Extremely important. And I think it's a fair question. Now that we're talking about interviewing your agent, I think it's a completely fair question that is not asked enough by sellers to their prospective listing agents is how available are you? To be honest, and then especially in the market that we're in right now, because with high interest rates and election year, we're in a little bit of like I would say like a down market in a sense that it's a little bit more of a buyer's market. We're still adjusting from the COVID high and all that good stuff, which was clearly a seller's market. But now that we're in a buyer's market, it's very, very important because I have a client, and this is just a funny story, but it's true. It was
love funny stories.
It was an elevation certificate. It's a very simple document that it ended up being that the seller did have it. The seller was a great seller, nice guy. I met him. He had the paper in his office, but it took 2 days for the listing agent to answer my phone calls and my texts and voicemails to requesting that one document. And because of the market that we're in, my buyer was like, Rod, look at this other property.
Yeah.
And we went to go see that other property, and we got that other property under contract.
That happened.
Did
they ever reach back out? Like the agent was like, "Oh, here it is."
Yeah.
Like a couple days later, we're like, "Well, we already."
And I was like, to be honest with you, and I don't think, again, it's very taboo, and I'm probably gonna get in trouble for this at some point. But I do think it's not okay. I just, for lack of a better term, from being on the buyer side and representing a lot of buyers, I don't think it's okay that listing agents are not, for whatever reason, like everybody has family and kids
busy and stuff. And I totally understand that, but maybe that's where your point where it's like almost like, is that agent too busy?
Correct.
Where that's harms like your clients you have because you're not available. Like,
exactly.
And not saying you have to answer your phone every 5 minutes, every seconds. No. Like you could be at a doctor's appointment, your kid's soccer game, whatever.
Yeah.
But like as long as you respond within like a day, I feel like
moderate amount of time.
A moderate amount of time. If anything's past that, it's like maybe you're not a listing agent for this property. Like maybe,
correct, and I think sellers should ask that question up front.
What's a nice way to say that? But
no, I think you said it perfectly because it's true. It does hurt sellers significantly, and I think it's a hurt that's not very evident. Just maybe the house sits on the market a little bit longer than it should. Maybe you get whatever 2, 3, 4% less on the price, whatever it is. But there is a negative effect to be had at it. So and I know that was quite a tangent, but
no, what I think it's good for listing side is asking them like, what is their plan? Like, what is the plan? What, like the price point, and like, what if we don't see anything? Like, what if it's really slow? We don't have a lot of feedback. Like, what's the plan here? What's our game plan for the next X amount of months?
Correct.
Just to kind of have an idea. Obviously things change, but that kind of gives you a heads up of like, this is the market we're in. This is what we're seeing. This is my prediction, but we'll see. We will make this change if we need to at this point. I think those are all like good things to start out with. And having like an understanding of before.
Correct. Have a set plan.
You're like, okay. And then you feel comfortable. You're like, okay, good. I'm secure.
No. And you do know, because like at the end of the day, again, the house is worth what somebody will pay for it. So you can speak to your listing agent and they can come up with a price and you can come up with a price and you guys can discuss it. And then you go to the market and a month later, the house, you've had 4 showings and the house hasn't sold.
Yeah.
So depending on the market, maybe you're overpriced. But to Kara's point, you want to have a plan in place already to what's going to happen if we don't get a good amount of traction within 2 or 4 weeks.
Yeah. What can we do differently? Like, how can we get this going here? Marketing, price reduction,
different
whatever.
things.
Different things. There's tons of things.
And again, like we talked about the gelling with your agent and the experience things, those still all apply. 100%. So everything that we talked about on the buyer side, that still applies.
There needs to be a good vibe.
There does. Well, even more, I would say, because on the seller side, it's going to be some hard conversations. I've had sellers that I'm scared to go to them when we've been overpriced and we've gotten a low ball offer. Right. Like, I'm scared.
Because I still do and you're kind of like, we probably should take this because we don't know, the next buyer that comes around. It could not be one.
It could not be
one.
And
it could just be sitting longer and longer. So it's like you have to make sure you guys mesh well, because if
similar communication,
like your agent's going to come to you and give you their actual advice because they're here to help you, and not trying to offend you and say you should just take it. It's a low ball, but you should take it. But like, if they're saying that, you should trust them, trust in your agent, like that they're there to help you. You probably should take it.
Correct. Yeah. And just going again, another story, but I had one, and it's like, we weren't crazy overpriced. We were a little overpriced, and it was a few months ago when the market was starting to adjust. And it was that type of situation where it's like, it's a little bit of, it wasn't a super low ball offer, but it was lower. And my client really wanted to stay at that specific price point. Right. And thankfully, because I had built rapport and we got along very well, and we've had a lot of good conversations and kind of interviewed each other, I would say at the beginning. Nobody's perfect. I wouldn't say I always do a perfect interview, but I think that one was pretty good. But we had a good rapport. It was still a tough conversation, but it was a tough conversation that I think was only possible. And we were able to get the outcome that was ultimately better for everybody. The sellers, myself, the buyers, everybody was involved, because this had the best outcome because I was able to have this very frank conversation with the seller, and they were receptive because we've had that rapport and that vibe trust thing.
The vibe trust thing.
The vibe was good. So and it's, again, it was,
and that's important, because if it wasn't there and they felt like, they didn't trust in their agent, or they felt like they were just, over it, or whatever the case may be, I think that really makes a difference.
It could have, and that, for even that one example. So God forbid I wasn't able to have that conversation, and I want to say convince, because I wasn't convincing. I was just educating myself.
It's like a hard word.
It is.
Like,
it's
you're trying to convince, but it's not convincing in a bad sense. It's like you're educating. You're like, this is the truth. My advice here to you.
And the advice was very clear. If we go back to the open market, so we were under contract and they renegotiated a little bit because something happened. If we go back to the market, the chances are we're not going to get this high of an offer.
Right.
Even after the credit they were asking for. And that was my honest opinion.
And you can take that risk. You can go. They're like, nope, but like,
the chances are, so a little statistic, if you are on the market, and you go pending and you come back to the market, so you go pending, you come back
because it didn't work out.
The chances that you get your full price offer, super, super low. I'm talking like 15-20%.
Yeah.
Unless it's like the house was on the market for one day and you had multiple bid situation, that's different. But if you're regular 20, I think our average days on market is like 20 or 30 right now. When you're at that point, if you go pending and you come back to the market because whatever happened, the transaction fell apart, the chances you get that full price offer again, very slim. So very just something to keep.
Because agents look at that, and you'll look at that, and
the market looks at that.
And the market look everything. It just changes things. So
so definitely something to keep in mind, and I think that's also when it comes to I think on the episode we should do for the why you don't need a realtor for the for sale by owners.
Yes.
I think that's a big part of it. It's like, if it's great, like maybe the realtor just sets the price and opens the door and you get under contract. What happens if you come out of that contract?
Yeah, right.
Because I promise you, I'll lose more than the 5 or 6% that you would have paid a realtor to get it done the first time. So I think that's
our next.
That's another episode in here somewhere. We're gonna talk about that. But no.
Yeah. So interview. That was good. So buyers, sellers, why you should interview your agent.
Yeah.
Why you should make sure you find the perfect match.
The perfect match. It doesn't have to be the perfect match. No, but and it
perfect,
does. But
something that just makes sense. And what does your intuition tell you? Like, hey, you know what? I think this person's been great. Or hey, I like this person. Or we talked for 2 seconds, but I already like them. Like, you can feel it.
Yeah, and I do think, and again, this is maybe a cliche to say, but like, just because somebody was a good agent for somebody else does not mean they're a good agent for you. And that goes for us too. I'm not saying
no, right. Right.
There's people that I've with all the compassion and love in my heart, like, honestly, like, I think you're better off with my wife or Kara or somebody else. I think you'll get along better with them. Everybody's going to have a better time with this transaction.
Yeah.
So that idea that like you should be like the agent for everybody, I think is not fair.
I 100% agree with that, because I think everyone has different personalities in the world, and everyone has different levels of communication styles, and like, you know, what are they looking for? So I don't think I'm everyone's, you know, cup of tea, and I don't think you are. I mean, I'm friendly with everybody.
Tara's more people's cup of tea than I am. Let's say that. But that is a red flag. I will say, if an agent's like, I'm everybody, if you ever hear a realtor say that, just take that as a red flag. It's like, that's not good. No, there's you should have an understanding of your personality and like who you get along with, because again, main thing, there's gonna be tough conversations.
It's a stressful process.
It's
not
very
like
stressful.
You know, yeah, you hope for smooth sailing, but you know, there's stress.
Yeah.
So,
and even the ones that are smooth sailing, again, if it makes stress, yeah. Which again, if you have a good realtor, that stress never gets to you. I think that's something that people also don't talk about. It's like, real estate is a very stressful time frame, money, inspections, insurance, title, blah 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 blah. All that stuff causes stress when something can just, like, one little thing can go off and the transaction falls apart, and then you're back to square one for the seller and for the buyer in most cases. So if you don't have like, for it to break down because of like little communication, I think is the issue. But that's what I was saying. It's like the stress. A good realtor blocks the stress.
Handles it for you.
Handles it for you because they have experience, because they have backup systems.
Or try to figure out like a solution before you even present it to your client. Like, you know, something happens, you try to figure it out before, and then you create a solution, and then they didn't even really need to know about certain things, because what's the point? You know, like if you can handle something on your own, that's the whole point, to make the transaction that much more, like, you know, easier.
Correct. Yeah. And I think a lot of it, and I think this is better for like you don't need a realtor part of it, but I do think that there is a conversation to be had about like what that stress actually causes the individual homeowner, as opposed to like what they get for it. So like our jobs, and this is just to be blunt, like we deal with the stress and we apply our knowledge and our experience for a paycheck. If you're doing it yourself, what are the chances that you as the buyer are going to have to deal with all that stress and with, I don't know, maybe more or less knowledge, but and skill set, but you still have to deal with all that stress. And then what do you get for it? Are you saving money? Are you
is it worth it?
Is it worth it? And I think that's
another episode.
No, it really is, like, so.
Yeah. No, so this is good.
Boom. Episode 3.
Yeah.